So today we are having our fourth episode of the Coping with COVID-19. On this beautiful Saturday, we have Miss Ashley. Would you like to introduce yourself and tell everybody about who you are?
Yes, thanks for having me, Raven. I'm Ashley Bryant. I am a therapist located here in Oklahoma City. I work a lot with individuals who are experiencing trauma, helping them overcome trauma. Also work a lot with couples, and I am so excited to have this conversation.
Yes, ma'am. So tell us what got you into therapy?
So, what got me into therapy is pretty much is I think so. It pretty much started with my own personal struggle with mental health, like growing up. Um, when I first started when I first started school, I thought that I wanted to be a physician because I love science. But then, as life progressed, so growing up, my mom died when I was 17, and so dealing with like suicidal ideation, suicidal attempts, and then having to go to therapy afterwards. My experience with therapy wasn't the greatest. And so during that time, that was like the first up close and personal experience that I had with therapy ever. Didn't know any therapists, anything like that. And so at that time is when I started to think about going into the therapy profession, where it's just like, okay, there are other people out there who need help, but who are not getting the help. And so it's like one of those things, like I have in my background, be the change that you want to see in the world. And so it's just like being that person that I needed at that particular time.
Wow, that is really admirable. What's one of the ways that you felt, because of course, that's not easy, like dealing with losing a parent, grandparent, losing anybody that you care about a lot is not easy at all. But how did you cope with it?
When I when my mom first died, I did not cope well at all.
Wow.
And so it did take over the years me beginning to develop more healthy coping skills. So in the beginning, it was a lot of depression. So and it's the thing about it is, when I came out with my story and people were like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that that you were suicidal at the time, because it's just like I had this persona so to
Right.
speak, that I had to put up, because growing up in Black culture, and even within my own family, we didn't talk about emotions. And so even after my mom died, it was kind of like, all right, business as usual, and kind of struggling with those emotions internally, and not having anyone to really talk to about the depression and about the suicidal ideations and things like that. Over time, I began to develop a relationship with a therapist that fit me. And some of the things that I found really helpful during that time was journaling. I would write letters to my mom. I would write letters to God and tell him how mad I was at him. And so really developing appropriate coping skills.
Wow. Ooh, I had to make sure I wasn't muted. um, and I'm so glad that you touched on that, because this week alone, I have seen a lot of people who have passed away, people that know somebody that, lost someone. And I really think, as much as, we try to avoid that conversation, it's so needed. Like, we need to hear ways to get through, especially during these times where, even though things are opening up, these cases are still increasing.
Right.
Like, these cases, I mean, we've had, can't remember the number that it was exactly, but in the case, like past 24 hours, well, yesterday, 24 hours, a lot of cases of COVID-19. So, people are also not only, dying from health related issues, but I've also had a classmate who passed away um, from, I believe it was mental health issues, like suffering with that. So, just thinking about the effect that this has had, because people are already dealing with their own mental health, whether it's depression, anxiety. COVID-19 and having to stay at home has not made it easier, for people to deal with. And, along with, not even being able to have funerals, not being able to have their weddings and, things like that, can take a toll on, people that really need that, whether it's their wedding that they're looking forward to or their funeral that they're needing to bury their family members and can't do it, So it just sucks. And I think, it's very good that you share, like, this is how I did it, because people could be lost out here if they don't know.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, Raven, because during this time we have individuals who are dealing with so many loss all at once. It's not only the loss of life, but you have individuals who are dealing with the loss of not having a traditional graduation, not having a traditional wedding, and so them knowing that it is okay to grieve that loss, just like you would grieve any other loss.
Yeah. Whew. It just, I would wish on anybody.
Yeah,
Wish on anybody. So
it's definitely, it can be a challenging time right now.
Right. So what, besides journaling, what are some other self-care things that you would recommend to individuals or even couples? Because even being in a relationship sometimes or a marriage, you can feel what your spouse is feeling, or your significant other. So what would be some things you would recommend not only just to individuals but for couples?
For couples, so couples who are like stuck in the house together, especially if you're like in a small quarters together, it is okay to take a break from your spouse as well. Sometimes you may have to either just kind of go into the other room to get some time by yourself, being open about what you need in that particular moment. Like, hey babe, I really need a break, or hey babe, I really just need to kind of sit outside in the backyard by myself. Like, it's going to be very important that you are vocal about what you need from whomever your housemate is, whether it's a roommate, whether it's a significant other, a parent, a sibling, being open about the communication, because this can be a time where we're all kind of struggling.
Right. So I guess too, I'm thinking about communication,
Mm-hmm.
So I guess also communicating those things, but what about maybe disagreements? Because like with spouses, they're in the home sharing together, and let's say the communication is not all the way down pat. So how do you navigate that?
Yes.
Not
So
easy.
so that's what we're going to have to really learn the art of taking a time out. And so if you are getting into a heated conversation with your significant other, and you find that conversation is not going anywhere, it's
Right.
time to take a step back. And then it's like, okay, let's table this conversation for right now. Give yourself time to kind of get to a calmer state. Whether it's 20 minutes or whether it's 30 minutes, and y'all agree to that time. I think one of the things that gets us in trouble when it comes to timeouts is we may say things like, I don't want to have this conversation right now. And so it leaves your partner wondering, okay, so if we're not going to have this conversation, when are we going to have this conversation?
Exactly.
And so really narrowing down a time as to, okay, I just need 20 minutes. I see this conversation is headed in a direction that I'm not really jiving with the way that it's going. I just need 20 minutes to just kind of gather myself, and then we can come back and have this conversation.
Okay. I'm gonna have to try that. I just need 5 minutes. Just give me 5 minutes. Because
Yes.
I'm guilty of that. I can say, like, I really don't want to talk about this. And then I'll go take a nap. And then when I wake up, it's like, so we're gonna talk about it. Talk about what? Like, it's fine.
Yes.
Take a nap. I was just overreacting.
Yes. And here's a trick, Raven. So sometimes you might be cool as a cucumber, but then your partner is just like blah 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 blah. So you never want to be like, okay, you need to go take a timeout. Just call a timeout on yourself. You
Right.
know, babe, I think that I need a timeout. How about we finish this conversation in about 20 minutes? And so that gives them time to calm down. And then you all can kind of come back and cooler heads prevail.
Right. That's a good point. Courtney is finally in. Courtney is our vice president. See, I think you're muted. There we go. Oh, I think she's muted again. Hold on. There we go. You're muted.
Hi, how are you guys?
Good. Hey, Courtney.
Hey, Ashley, how you doing? I love your smile.
It's so good to see you.
I know. I'm so glad I get to see y'all too. Yes. How was your week?
Good.
We've just been talking about grieving. We've been talking about just starting self-care ideas. We started talking about communication within, your significant other, spouse during these times, but then also talking about when communication can go wrong in this time as well. And then you came in at the perfect time. Do you have any questions that you may want to drop off to Ashley?
I mean, I have several questions. So, Ashley, first off, how are you doing?
I'm good.
I'm glad to hear that. I was wondering, because you said you specialize in trauma and what other, I just wanted to make sure I had all your fields correct.
Yes, I specialize in trauma, and complex trauma, and also working with couples, all couples.
All couples, yes.
Yes.
Listen, I got a couple different couples that come up to me like, Courtney, oh my gosh, how do I deal with this, and I don't know. I'm sorry, I'm not in that spectrum. Can you tell someone, like for me, I have friends of all different calibers, and they ask me for like relationship advice. Don't get me wrong. I know a heterosexual relationship should be considered the same as like a homosexual relationship or any other type of relationship for that matter. But like, how would you say it would be any difference in like addressing certain problems from like that perspective?
So when we talk about addressing the problems really isn't that different, because relationships are all relationships. We all struggle. We all have a similar issues when it comes into our relationship. And so just because you're in a heterosexual relationship or a homosexual relationship doesn't mean that you are exempt from struggles that all relationships have.
I be struggling. Even in instance right now. I mean, I'm not in one, but still, just be trying to figure it out. Like, what? But yeah, I mean, because like, I don't know how to tell y'all the difference. I mean, I'm going to tell you what I went through and what happened to me. I mean, if you try that and it don't work out for you, I'm sorry. We both in the same boat. I mean, we can try to figure it out. We just got to go find Ashley. But other than that.
And that's the thing, Courtney, even among, if you look at relationships in general, everybody's experience in relationships are going to be different, no matter what relationship you're in and no matter who your partner is. We all have different struggles. And so you can come from the perspective of, okay, this is what I do in my relationship, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to work for this relationship or this relationship or this relationship, regardless of the dynamics of the relationship.
Right. Yeah, because
I think sometimes we can get ourselves in trouble when we start trying to categorize things.
Right.
Like, oh, well, we have different standards for this and this. And I personally, in my opinion, I think it should be a certain level of standards across the board.
Right.
When it comes to respect and, how you want to be treated, things like that. And when we talk about that, that's what comes to mind, is just the fact that sometimes we can find ourselves categorizing.
Right. And don't get me wrong, there are some struggles that homosexual couples deal with that heterosexual couples don't deal with. Like, for instance, like the discrimination and people looking at them sideways when they're just doing them, like loving on their partner out in public, that, heterosexual couples, especially being in Oklahoma, don't experience.
Yeah, because I don't get looked at sideways as little homie is, just caressing on my arm or something, but let someone like, I don't know, I have a homegirl, let her and her significant other be out. I'm like, can you stop looking at them like that? Like, just let them be great. They minding their business. You should mind yours, go in that corner. But that's not what I say. I just sit back and smile because they told me.
And I think it's also different within it. You may have a same sex, female relationship, which is more so normalized in this society where it's like, oh, that's fine, whatever. But then when it's dealing with same sex male, now we're dealing with possible risk of not only them, being judged and being verbally attacked, but also physically attacked. Because I've had to, see some friends go through that where, they're out minding their business and they don't even want to go out on dates anymore because they're scared of being physically assaulted because of the person that they choose to love. So that's so real because we don't have to worry about that, being in a heterosexual relationship. Like, that's fine. But once you're dealing with that and transgender couples, things like that, it's
Right.
definitely different. And I think, too, something that we do share is the fact that the love is there, but we all go through communication issues. We all go through moments where we may feel insecure in our relationship and we have to bounce ourselves back. We all want to be, supported by our loved ones. But now, going into the other side of things is that abuse is still, present. And that's something that we can't, I guess not shut out, but we can't push them out, just because it's like, oh, well, they same sex, it doesn't happen. No, that happens too. So can you kind of talk about that? Because, with us being in this pandemic, I know child welfare, they've been concerned for the safety of the kids now being at home. Same thing with, women or men that may be in abusive relationships as well. Can you talk to us about that aspect?
Honestly, I don't know what the statistics are when it comes to, what the abuse has been during this particular pandemic. But the reality of the situation is it was going on before and it's still going on now. And just because we're in a pandemic doesn't necessarily mean that those resources that are available to individuals who are in an abusive relationship go away. I've seen a lot of individuals posting on their social media like code words for, if you're in an abusive situation, let me know so I can, get the appropriate authorities. And so, just tapping into those particular resources, which it can be tough to leave an abusive. It is tough to leave an abusive relationship, and I don't think that individuals really think about that aspect of it. I think that we're so caught up on that person being in that abusive relationship. But one of the things that the most difficult thing for them to do is to leave that abusive relationship for whatever reason. And each individual is going to have a different reason as to what makes it more difficult for them to leave that abusive relationship. But there are resources through the YWCA for individuals who are experiencing intimate partner abuse.
Ooh.
What about for loved ones? I know, like, when it comes to, child abuse and things like that, we are mandated reporters.
Yes.
We see something that's going on, we are obligated to report to that. But with loved ones seeing, our maybe friends and family going through, abusive relationships, I can see it being a sense of fear, hesitance, things like that. To actually report. And I think it's important that when we see these things going on, we have to think about the welfare of our loved ones that's enduring it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, putting yourself in that position, you're thinking about the backlash that can come from it. What may happen if I call and she protects him, and then now I look crazy. Things like that. Have you ever had to deal with maybe even yourself or dealing with someone who kind of had that same dilemma?
Absolutely. I think that, you know, it is where you can definitely get torn, where it's like, I know I have this obligation, but then the backlash that can come about, I think we think about, okay, this is going to tear our family apart. This is going to be a rift, but you know, it's about protecting that vulnerable individual, whether we're talking about reporting child abuse, elder abuse, vulnerable adult abuse. It's about protecting that individual that cannot protect themselves.
Right.
And so if it's somebody that you're close to, then maybe you can say, you know, depending on what the dynamics of that relationship is, hey, I have to report this. I have to make the call, but I would like to make the call with you. I would like for you to do a self-report and I will sit right here with you. But regardless, the call is going to be made. Because you can self-report. You can call the DHS hotline and make a report on yourself.
Right. And you can also do it anonymously.
Mm-hmm.
I know when I worked for DHS, like we had a lot of anonymous calls, which of course when sometimes you don't know who called, but sometimes, you know, if the person is doing their job right and you're investigating right, then
Right.
you can kind of get to the bottom of, okay, this is what's going on, you
Right.
know, stuff like that. And a lot of times, you know, when you start, you know, even getting the three closest people to you, you know, okay, tell us about this. Someone will say like, hey, don't tell them I said it, but hey, this is what's going on. Look at these signs. Because it's fear. A lot of it is fear and being in an abusive relationship. I well was not being currently, but in the past being in it, it's definitely, you know, one of those things where being in, you're like, I know this isn't right, but I don't know how to get out, and I'm not strong enough currently to do it. Now, if I have a push, sometimes that's what a lot of these, you know, individuals are needing is just a push, you know. But what I think is important for the loved ones, people that's around, to know is that when you're in that situation, sometimes it can just seem like you're in a dark room and you're by yourself. You can't. Logic isn't always there. And I think it's so easy for people to say, oh, well, if that was me, I wouldn't be in that situation. And I don't know why she don't just leave or why he just, you know, don't do this. And he's a man, he should have to be. But it's like, no,
No.
it doesn't always work that way.
Right.
It's hard.
Right. Abuse, it knows no IQ, no race, no socioeconomic class. It affects several people. Like there isn't this ideal person who is experiencing abuse. It crosses so many and touches so many people. I think that when we talk about the issue of reporting abuse, I think one thing we
I love everybody.
I'm so sorry.
I am intrigued by people.
Courtney, also mute your thing, please. Sorry.
I think, you know, kind of going back to when we talk about reporting abuse, one of the things that we have to remember as mandated reporters is we are not mandated investigators. We are mandated reporters. So our job is to report and let the investigators do the investigating.
Right. That is so real. Man, we kind of just went all over the place. We went through trauma, relationships. Is there anything you want to talk about specifically?
I don't have anything specifically. I'm just down to talk about whatever y'all want to.
Oh, okay. Because I can go for days with these conversations. Because for me, I think the whole purpose and why we wanted to do this is because we wanted to really dive in to human being and knowing like, okay, what's really, you know, going on? How are you doing? Like, what are some things that you think is important for our community members to know? Because we can have, you know, seminars all day long, but if we're not having these real conversations, you know, and actually diving into conversations that some people may be scared to touch on, we'll never reach the people that we need to reach.
Right.
I've been to like several seminars where I just felt like it was very, you know, like, oh, well, if you see this is wrong, then report this, blah, blah. But it's like, but what if? What if this? What if that? And sometimes you can't ask those questions in a seminar full of 50
Right.
people.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I just wanted us to have those conversations. I love that.
And the reality of the situation, if you're in a situation where you have to report child abuse, that pit in your stomach is not going to go away. Like you're going to feel that anxiety and you're going to feel that pit in your stomach while you're doing it, because it's something difficult to do. I mean, it's not anything to be taken lightly. Yes, it's our responsibility, and yes, we're going to do it, but also it is going to be some discomfort in doing it.
Right. We have some live viewers right now. Amber Lane says, "Hey Ashley."
Hey, Amber.
We have Miss Lovely Richards. She said, "Hey cousin, we need more education and support from mental health community." And then I think it comes. We're talking about. I want to say this could be along the lines of reporting, abuse in families. But she said, yes, it crosses a lot of socioeconomic boundaries of all families.
Yes.
And that is something that I often think about, is the socioeconomic, boundaries of families. And, that's something that we discussed a lot working in DHS. We talked about a lot of different factors. What do you think are some of the, let's see, how do I want to say this? Like, I guess for me, I want to kind of just wipe away the stereotypes, right? Like when I remember being an investigator and we would go into families, I remember having certain caseworkers who automatically stereotype.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, they live in a trailer home, so they must have done this.
No.
Oh, they might be bad parents, because why would somebody do that? Why would somebody live in that? Or, oh, these are Hispanics, so this must be true. Oh, this is a Black family on the east side. That must be, like just automatic. But what they didn't know is, and I had to tell something like, a lot of my worst cases came from the neighborhoods in Edmond with their kids going to Deer Creek. Like a lot of the ones that were really functioning addicts were the lawyers, were the, doctors, things like that, people that you wouldn't immediately stereotype. But then the ones that were really good parents were the ones that came from the trailer home. They just have it together.
Right.
So, what do you think about that?
And absolutely, there's abuse going on in low income families, there's abuse going on in middle class families, there's abuse going on in wealthy families, just like there are loving relationships going on in low income families, middle class, and wealthy. It doesn't matter where what background you come from, like abuse can touch anyone.
Exactly. And no one's exempt.
Right.
It just, when it comes to abuse, you get caught up with the wrong person. And sometimes even, for, myself, whether it's with, abusive people, manipulative, things like that, it's also knowing the red flags and running the first time. It's like, oh, I see a red flag, but maybe that's not a red flag. Maybe it was just he or she messed up one time. Maybe she won't do it again, or he won't do it again. But when it comes to, identifying those red flags, that is so critical. Right. Because if you don't, then you're going to end up in that same situation. And sometimes, even a part of like not seeing the red flags is also making excuses, because you think, oh, I couldn't go through this. I'm exempt from going through it. And it's like, no, abuse has no, see no eyes, see no colors, see none of that. Like if it's gonna be there, it's gonna be there. It does not discriminate. Same thing with abusers. Some of them do. Well, I mean, they discriminate from people that they know won't tolerate it, but if they can see a weakness, they're going to try to take advantage of it. Mm-hmm. So, what are some, of the red flags that you think people should be cautious for when it comes to dealing with these things?
I think when it comes to abuse, especially from the mental health aspect, it is super important to get with a domestic violence advocate that specializes in domestic violence, because when we talk about domestic violence, that's a life or death situation. And so if you don't have the appropriate training, you may make mistakes. Domestic violence isn't my area of expertise. So I'm going to get you with people who that is their expertise. So I'm going to refer you out to the YWCA to get with a domestic violence advocate. And so I think it's really crucial to, as you are experiencing mental health challenges, get with the appropriate person that is equipped to deal with that particular mental health challenge, because not every therapist can deal with every issue. And I have no problem, saying what is within my wheelhouse and what is not within my wheelhouse. And domestic violence is one of those things where it is not within my wheelhouse, but I'm gonna get you with somebody where it is within their wheelhouse.
Right. And I think and Miss Richardson, who's watching, she could probably also agree with us as well. She said red flags are important. She's been in an abusive relationship. Wow. And it's also the importance to being a therapist. Actually, I want to speak for being a therapist, but she also brought up the fact that she also had to change her name on social media because clients were stalking her.
Yeah.
So it's like, protecting yourself is important, like no matter who it is. So it just blew me reading that. What was I saying? Palomar is a good resource.
Yes.
So Palomar is a good resource. I remember they were a one-stop shop. So whoever's watching, Palomar. Do you know of any other places, ladies? But I know Palomar was always my recommendation.
I can post them in the comment section after we're done.
Okay, perfect. I know Palomar, they assisted with everything from the beginning to the end. They helped with, identifying what situation you're in, helping with filling out the victim protective order, things like that, making sure that your kids were going to be okay as well. Because I know sometimes a lot of women, and even men, are scared to even report or get DHS involved because they don't want to feel like they're going to lose their children. I don't want to lose my kids because, the DHS worker thinks I want to be in this environment. Like sometimes, they are literally reaching out for help. But it's like you really have to pray you get the right caseworker who really has a heart for it. Because just because, you deal with a caseworker doesn't mean that she's passionate about her job or he's passionate. Sometimes they just do it just to get the bills paid, or dealing with the right therapist, not being afraid to shop around. I have to learn to shop around with my therapist, because just because you may be a therapist do not mean you are right for me.
Exactly.
Same thing with finding domestic violence advocates. Not all domestic violence advocates are truly domestic violence advocates. They may just wear the title. So I've definitely seen where someone was supposed to be advocating for, the behalf of their client or the one that was being abused or the victim. And it seemed like they were victim shaming. And it was like, are you here to help or are you here to tear down? Which one is it? So it just encouraging people to have a voice and to say, hey, you are not a good fit for me, but do you know somebody that is?
Yeah.
They're not advocating for me and my children the way that I believe that they're supposed to be doing. Can you please find someone else for me?
Yeah. And don't be afraid to ask your clinician about what experience do you have in the issue that I'm going through. So what is your experience in training in domestic violence? And anybody should be more than happy to share with you what their experience is and what their training is in that particular area, whether you're seeing somebody for couples, whether you're seeing them for domestic violence, asking them about their training and expertise. And so you can make sure that you're with someone that is equipped to deal with the issues that you're wanting to work through.
Right. We have another live viewer. She asked, how do you feel about online therapy? The one I keep seeing is BetterHelp. I think that's the name.
Okay. I don't have a lot of experience with those particular organizations. I've heard of like BetterHelp and Talkspace. Online therapy in and of itself is just as effective as face-to-face counseling. The research says that it's just as effective as face-to-face counseling. A lot of clinicians who have brick and mortar offices also do online counseling as well. In my office, I've been doing online counseling for years, and several other clinicians have as well.
Right. And it's been a blessing during this time. The telehealth has been actually covered through my insurance.
Yes.
Because it's been hard. And I do like it because the convenience. You
Mhm.
know, you're, at work or leaving work late and you're trying to fight that traffic. And normally you may have missed the appointment if you're working late. It's just a matter of being on your cell phone device, tablet, or computer. So
Yeah.
it's definitely been enjoyable. I love my online therapy. It's been great. Just matter of being on the porch and being able to talk and get it out the way, because I was very concerned about how my therapy appointments were going to go, with the pandemic, because to me it's important. It's very important for me to be in my sessions and get it off, because, talking to your friends is cool, but it's not enough.
Mhm.
It's not enough for me. I mean, speaking for myself, but having an outside perspective, someone that can't really side with you on everything because they're going to see it from the overall perspective.
Right.
And, with me shopping around with my therapist, she doesn't hesitate to tell me whether I'm right or wrong, which is great. Don't sugarcoat things. Don't be on my side. Like, in the recent session, I had to learn the importance of me truly minding my business. Like, I think I need to mind my business. And she was like, I think so too.
That's a word, Raven. I think we all can use that advice.
But it's hard because I think when you really want the best for everyone, and you find yourself being that strong friend, the one that's like, hey, I've been through this. Don't go through it. Like, don't do it. Or you see someone really needing help, and then you want to like go in and be, Captain Fish everything and save everybody. It's draining, and sometimes what I've learned is the person can resent you for it.
Yeah.
Because it's like, okay, you're helping me, but to me, you're taking over.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it's like, that's not what I'm trying to do, but you wouldn't have to worry about that because mind your business.
But yes, to answer your question, and like what Raven brought up, is online counseling can help remove a lot of barriers that keep people from reaching out to counseling. Transportation barriers, especially individuals who live in rural areas. I see a lot of individuals that live in rural areas where everybody knows everybody, and so you're gonna run into your counselor at the grocery store and at church, and all the time. And so it can definitely eliminate some of those barriers. I think it's just getting over that first hesitance between it's going to be different between versus like seeing them on a screen versus seeing them face to face.
Courtney, what's your thoughts on these things? Talk to us, Courtney.
Hey guys. I mean, y'all are hitting a bunch of great points, and they have like really just, you stepped on my toes a couple, 3, 4 times. But other than that, I really had a question, not so much about relationships, Ashley. That's okay. In this time, like with the relationships that we do have, and with us trying to cope with everything that's going on, I was just wondering, I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought. Hold on. During this time and how we're having to deal with being at home and deal with, like you said, doing online counseling, doing different type of ways to connect with our therapist and our ways to cope, what would you say is a good way to deal with not only being like away from friends and family and being like, for instance, basically what I'm trying to ask is, how would you help someone who is doing online counseling as well as in a domestic relationship and trying to like how would you help someone out in that perspective? Like, what is some tips that you could give them? Like, they're trying to hide the fact that they're in counseling, all while dealing with this, relationship that's just too much for them to handle. Do you get what I'm saying?
What I'm hearing you say is someone who is in counseling, but their partner doesn't know that they're in counseling.
Right. Like, how would you tell them to cope with that right now during this pandemic?
That's an interesting question, Courtney, because it's going to be difficult to have those sessions if your partner is right there. And maybe that's something that they can kind of safety plan with their therapist, because when you're in a domestic violence situation, you definitely want to make sure that you have a safety plan. But that is something you want to make sure that you incorporate as part of your safety plan, even just off the top of my head, I don't know if there are situations where they have to take conference calls for their job during the day where they have to kind of go off by themselves. And so maybe scheduling their therapy appointment during a regular work day, as part of their conference call schedule, so to speak, or sitting out in the garage, if you have a garage or driveway, having that session out in the car, but also doing it in a safe manner. I think it's going to be really where they're going to have to safety plan that with their domestic violence advocate or their therapist to figure out what's going to be the best way for them to get the care that they need, but also keep them safe.
Right.
Yeah,
Even
because
maybe going to the store, making a spontaneous store trip, during certain. I mean, depending on how often the person has their therapy appointment. So maybe I remember someone I would deal with a client who did their safety plan was after school they would start taking their kids on ice cream dates. So like they would go, hey, I'm gonna take kids ice cream, to go to the park and stuff like that. And while the kids were playing at the park, they would have their therapy session.
Mm-hmm.
So the therapist would either meet them at the park or they would do it on the phone. If they was going to make a store trip run, as soon as she get out the car and she's pulling out the garage, earphones in, she's talking to the therapist during the time she's, driving to the store, things like that, and then coming back. So just finding different ways like that. I know I sit on the porch, just keeping that, like if he's here and he's, playing a game or something like that, just because even though I'm not in an abusive relationship, just keeping that privacy, maintaining the privacy within my own online session. I should feel comfortable in, at home to be able to discuss everything I would discuss if I was in the office. So I go for a walk around the neighborhood, or I'll sit outside on the porch. I may, talk to her while I'm, running an errand, going to the post office, something like that. So I think anything, like you said, that would help create distance. So finding different ways to do that. I agree with Ashley 100%.
And whatever barriers that you have to continue your treatment, bring that up with your therapist so you all can navigate that together. Because if it's like, okay, I know that I want to continue therapy, but here's some of the issues that I have, so y'all can kind of have a plan to tackle that ahead of time.
Because honestly, if it's that kind of like, if it's that severe, I really feel like that therapist or the domestic violence advocate would definitely be able to say like, hey, I think at this point we would need to intervene if it's like that, if it's like super crazy. But I think I'm only really speaking from seeing some severe cases where it's like, okay, at this point we really need to intervene at this point, because it gets to a point where it's really not healthy at all, and it's life threatening, where it's like anything could set that person off, kind of thing. God forbid, they find out that their spouse is in therapy we don't want to have to even find out what their reaction may be. I think that's something else I think about. Interesting. Like, these conversations are so important, especially within the Black community, because a lot of people, I'm currently writing a book discussing, domestic violence and abuse and things like that. And it's one of those things where a lot of times we don't say anything because we just don't know how. A lot of times we stay in situations longer than we should because we don't know how to get out of it. And it seemed like in a lot of the cases that I've seen and people I've discussed, it's just the lack of these conversations plays a big part, and even for myself being in an abusive relationship, I've never seen an abusive relationship before. So when I found myself in it, a lot of times I knew it was bad, but then I was like, but how do I get out? And of course, now looking back, it's like, oh, well, I could have told my teachers. I could have told, my parents. But in that moment, it's not that easy. Like, it's not that easy. And I remember for a period of time, I resented my friends who knew about it. And I was like, y'all knew about it. Why didn't y'all call for me? Like, y'all knew what was going on. But then I had to realize they didn't know what they were doing either. They didn't know what to do. They didn't want to call, and then I'd be upset with them. They didn't, they did call. What do they say?
Yeah.
Do they tell my parents? So it's a lot of that I think about, within our community, that we have to start having these conversations. But how young do we start having these conversations with our children, with our siblings? I have a 15-year-old sister, and I've had to have the conversation with her, but that was only because she asked. She was like, who is so-and-so? And I had to go ahead and explain to her who so-and-so was, and explain to her, like, hey, your sister was in a situation she had no business being in. This happens. Don't be afraid to talk to me because I've been there. But I didn't have a sister to talk to me about that. And I don't fault my parents for not having a conversation with me, because I guess to me, it's, you don't think to have a conversation about something you didn't think would ever be an issue.
Right.
It's like it didn't come to mind. So in your opinion, how early should we start having these conversations in the household?
I think especially if you are dating, if you're dating, we need to be having conversations about intimate partner abuse, because it happens among teenagers. It happens among individuals who are in middle school. It happens in any relationship, like what's not okay, and who you can talk to when these particular things happen, who you can report it to. And so, as far as your sister being 15, I think that that's very much appropriate to have that conversation with her. Or if individuals who are 12, having that conversation with them.
We got another question. How much does self-determination determine a person's relationship?
I don't think I understand the question.
Let's see. I'm telling you to expand more on it.
Okay.
I'm sure she's watching, but just in case. And she also says she talked to her daughter when she was 7.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's very interesting. Because the only thing I was curious too, maybe talking to, a child that young as well, is, well, I guess it also depends on how much the kid knows as well, because some kids are far advanced than the next kid. So I guess that's something else I thought about was, at what age do you think, kids can even process what's going on,
Well, I think it's, as soon as, children develop a vocabulary is when we need to start introducing conversations of unwanted touch. And so domestic violence is just another form of unwanted touch that we bring about in this conversation.
Wow, that is so true. because that is also a very big thing we do not talk about.
Yeah.
Is, you know, child molestation, you know,
Right.
and even being older, you know, I realized when talking to also people who went to, you know, similar things with sexual abuse, a lot of times they didn't even realize that that was what that was until they got older.
Right.
And it was like, wow, like, I think let's see if she expanded. When in a domestic violence relationship, how much do you honor the woman's or the man's self-determination to stay in the relationship? That's good.
Meaning, I'm trying to process what that.
How much do you honor the woman's or the man's self? So to me, I guess and she's watching this, so I'm assuming from the victim side. So like, or from the abuse. So if I'm in an abusive relationship, how much will we honor the man's self-determination to stay in this relationship and fight for it? Or if I'm in an abusive relationship, how much would you honor me for being determined to try to stay and fight through this relationship? And that's what I'm wondering, from what perspective is she saying it from?
Yes.
Okay, so let's see. If they want to stay in the violence. So if I'm in a domestic violence relationship, how much would you honor me, well, my self-determination to stay in the violent relationship? Yeah, that's what she's meaning.
So go ahead.
What do you think?
So, and I think that I'm kind of stuck on in the author of the question. You'll have to clarify. I think I'm kind of stuck on the word as far as like honor and what you mean by honor, because you know, as far as honor, as far as you being I guess I'm not sure what that means. I can tell you from a clinical standpoint, if you were to come into my office and you were to disclose that I really want to work on this relationship, but there is some unwanted touch that's happening in this relationship, there's some abuse that's happening. Couples counseling, we're done. Because we're not going to work on the couples counseling until the domestic violence is taken care of. Because if we continue to try to work on this relationship, what it does is it kind of sweeps the domestic violence under the rug. We got to get that taken care of before we work on the relationship in and of itself. So I will not work with a couple where there is domestic violence happening within that relationship.
So at that point, would you begin to do individual counseling for the abuser? Or I know there is a batters class that abusers typically go to. Like, what would be the process for that if me and my boyfriend came in and I disclosed there was abuse in this relationship? What would then be the process? What would that look like?
And so that's when we go back to my wheelhouse, right? So in my wheelhouse, I don't work with individuals who are experiencing domestic violence. So for the victim, I will refer them to a domestic violence advocate. And for the perpetrator of the abuse, I will refer them to a BIP program or batterers intervention program.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that I sometimes I don't know what it is like now, but have you seen the batterers intervention program to be effective as of recent times? Because I've dealt with cases where the guy, you know, domestic violence relationship, and I'm like, hey, you know, we're gonna have to recommend, you know, this, and letting your probation officer know, and you're like, I'm not doing it, I've done that twice, and I'm like, what? What you mean you've done that twice? You know, so at this point, I mean, what do we do at that point when the man is saying he's not trying to go on his third time, but we have the woman that stays?
Yeah.
You know, so it's like at that point, what is then the solution? Because I don't want it, I get afraid for that woman to stay until she can't stay here on earth anymore.
Right.
Because she's continuing this.
Right. And what we know about domestic violence is it escalates. And so, it's like, hitting, pushing, like choking, death. Like it's one of those things where it escalates. And unfortunately, with VIP programs, I haven't seen a lot of data on the effectiveness of it, but at this point in time, those are kind of like the only resources that we have for perpetrators of domestic violence.
Right. Man, I think that's something I may want to look into just personally on my, in my spare time, is seeing the effectiveness in these programs.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't even mind seeing what are they, currently teaching them in this program. It's the same as, is it the same program doing the same thing that they did 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, or are they actually taking the time to find more ways to start, digging deeper and not just sticking with the same template, because now with technology going on, that's another thing that can feed into, another factor in abusive relationships. The fact that compared to 50 years ago, to now, more women are independent and working now, so now that intimidation and jealousy can play another factor into it, just things like that. I just always wonder about those programs. How effective are they, and are they moving forward and, I guess aligning themselves with today's time?
Right.
And even bringing in, I would be interested too to even get to know, the people now who were formerly abusers, and having them come back and speak to the current abusers.
Yeah.
Because it's one of those things where we know that that's not okay, but some abusers don't.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with it.
And some forms of abuse, some individuals don't know it's abusive. Like if your partner is trying to leave and you block their exit, like they don't realize that that's abuse. And
Right.
so I think you're absolutely right. Is, I think a lot of times we focus on like the actual physical contact as abuse, but abuse takes on many different forms.
Right. And even manipulation, that's an abuse.
Yeah.
What are some ways that people can combat manipulation?
In regards to, I think we have to be a little bit more specific.
So let's say real life, well, not real life example, but let's say like I'm in a relationship and I'm dealing with a partner that tends to make me feel guilty, or basically the end goal is to isolate me from everyone. But by doing that, I'm let's say I'm being manipulated. Well, he's trying to make me feel guilty for being active or hanging out with friends or talking up on, no, not saying this is happening world, but say for an example, that's happening. How can someone combat that? Or maybe, say a woman is being really ambitious, has, getting promotion and job, like doing good things, but because her man isn't, basically isn't being supportive, being, jealous, intimidated, now he's trying to make her feel less than, things like that. Or maybe, well, why you should do that? That's stupid. You probably shouldn't do that now, because the person that she loves is downing her in her ambition and things like that. Now she's second guessing herself.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. Now she's isolating herself and not even realizing it. How can someone combat people who are being manipulative?
So then it's definitely time to have a conversation with that particular partner, because they may not realize that is what they're doing. They also may not realize that is having that particular effect on them. And if you have the conversation and you find that, okay, they do know what they're doing, they are doing it intentionally, then it's probably time for you to evaluate whether or not this is the relationship that you want to be in.
Yeah, so with that same, would you still use that same tips when it comes to maybe family members who are manipulative and friends that, mainly I would say more so family members, because sometimes that can happen with family too, where they try to make you feel guilty.
Absolutely. Anybody, whether anybody that you have a relationship with, if you expect, so I think one of the things is you have to be clear as to your expectations for that particular relationship. So whether it's, you know, me and you, Raven, we have a friendship, or whether it's with my partner, what are my expectations for that relationship? Have I expressed those expectations for that relationship? And if those expectations are not being met, then what are the consequences for that not happening? And so I think that you have to kind of look at it like this. Okay, so this is what I expect. This is what I need. And if it's not happening, what do I do? Do I continue this relationship? Is it something that we try to work on together? Does that make sense?
Yeah, to me, it makes sense. Yeah.
Okay.
I love that. I want to kind of switch gears and ask you a question. What does it look like for you to be a therapist of color in this world, in this city? Like, what does that look like to be a Black woman in therapy?
What does it look like to be a Black woman in therapy? I think for me, what it looks like is I think I get an opportunity it's just one more opportunity that I get to destigmatize therapy as a whole, and also for my community. Because, you know, for me, from the standpoint of, you know, letting individuals know that from a therapist standpoint and also from a client standpoint, that it's okay to go to therapy. I would side-eye any therapist that doesn't have their own therapist, by the way.
I was about to ask you that. What does a therapist do? Who does a therapist talk to?
Any good therapist should have their own therapist. And I said what I said.
Yep, I said what I said. That is real. Because I think sometimes, we talked about this before, you know, with another therapist, I was telling her, sometimes, you know, people want to know that their therapist is human too.
Right.
You know, just like being a kid, and, you know, you see your teacher, then you get older, and you see your teacher at the club, you're like, why you going to the club? You're supposed to be at home knitting. Like, now the teacher had a life too. You know, when they were dealing with us from Monday to Friday, they were drinking their Hennessy margaritas on Saturdays. So I think, you know, even with police officers, first responders, you know, sometimes, you know, it ends up being therapist versus the community. I'm not going to go talk to no therapist because I don't want her in my business. Or I don't want him in my business. I don't want you know, it becomes, if you go see a therapist, there's something wrong with you. You know, it's like the therapist sometimes can be painted as the enemy. You know, like, we don't need her in our business, blah, 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 when the therapist is there to help. You know, so it's like showing that side that, hey, I'm a therapist who have a therapist. I have my own family. I have, you know, my husband or wife might get on my nerves too. You know, you're not alone. But with the knowledge that I worked hard for, you know, and the things that I can gain and stuff, I'm here to help you.
Yeah.
You know, just like someone is here to help me, you know, your therapist. So
Yeah.
I just love to ask that question, you know, what do a therapist do when they're in distress, when they're going through life, or, you know, do a therapist have a therapist?
Yeah. I stand behind that. Every therapist should have a therapist, because for me as a therapist, I am never going to ask my clients to do something I am not willing to do myself.
Love that.
Yeah.
I love that
Love
too.
that. Let's see. So we kept you 7 minutes over time. I'm so sorry.
It is okay.
We definitely enjoyed this conversation. Is there anything that you would like to share with the community, the viewers? Is there any suggestions you would have for us to better serve our communities? Like, anything like that you like to share?
I don't have anything right off top, but I will definitely leave my contact information in the comments if anybody has, additional questions, or if they want to reach out, or, even if you just need some resources to help get connected with with a therapist in the community, whether it's myself or whether it's another therapist. Just know that there are people who are out there who are ready and willing to serve you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Courtney. Do you have anything else?
Ashley, thank you so much for joining us and having this conversation with us about coping with COVID and trauma and domestic violence, and how you're going to help us be, accepting to the fact that we can call you our homegirl, our therapist homegirl. I feel like that's what I can call you now, my therapist homegirl. Can I call you my therapist homegirl?
You know I love talking to y'all, so of course we can keep on going, but
No, we definitely would have to have a part 2 for sure.
Yes.
And I think we should definitely have a part 2 of this. And next time I'll send you some dates if you'd like to come back and join us. I know we are having our sip and self-care. It'll be July the 11th.
Okay.
It'll be in person. So if you would like to come on out and join us, we'll, have wine, hors d'oeuvres, water for people that don't drink, with juice, things like that. And we'll be diving into, really getting into the, mental health, physical health, self-care, things like that in person. So if you would like to join us for that, we'll definitely send you more information.
That sounds lovely. I just really appreciate you all so much for facilitating these type of conversations, because they are very much needed.
Thank you so much. Thank you for supporting us.
No problem.
We will wrap this up, and I'll make sure I get this video out to you, so you want to share this out to your platform and your people. So I'll make sure I email that to you as well.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Have a good evening. Bye, everybody.